From the studios of Penn State Public Broadcasting, tonight's program is part of WPSU's Common Ground Lobby Talk series. Here's host Patty Satalia.
Pennsylvania's Marcellus Shale has the potential to fuel the entire country for 2 full years and make Pennsylvania the center of America's next energy boom. What impact will the rush for natural gas in Pennsylvania have on our region? Good evening, I'm Patty Satalia. Welcome to WPSU's Common Ground Lobby Talk, Marcellus Shale, the environmental, economic, and social issues. Earlier in the year, we talked about landowner issues. Tonight, we'll discuss the public concerns surrounding Pennsylvania's gas rush. And our studio audience is invited to join the conversation. Now, let's meet our guests. Attorney Gary Filatovich is currently representing Salem Township in a case before the state Supreme Court, the outcome of which could determine how much control local municipalities have over drilling for natural gas. Extension educator Tom Murphy is a member of the statewide Penn State Cooperative Extension Natural Gas team tasked with educating landowners, public officials, and community and business leaders on the impact of the exploration for natural gas. Ed Ireland is Executive Director of the Barnett Shale Energy Education Council, a community resource that provides information to the public about gas drilling and production in the Barnett Shale region of Texas. And Margaret Brittingham is a professor of wildlife resources and an extension wildlife specialist at Penn State. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Thanks, Patty.
Before we delve into some of the economic, social, and political issues, let's get an overview, a brief overview, Tom, if we could. What and where is the Marcellus Shale, and just how much natural gas do we expect to be there?
Patty, what we're seeing is the Marcellus Shale is covering roughly 2/3 of the state. If you struck a line from the northeast corner of the state to roughly the southwestern corner, everything to the north and to the west of that line is where you would find the Marcellus Shale footprint. It also extends up into the lower part of New York, out into the eastern part of Ohio, and down into West Virginia, Kentucky, down through that area. So it's a very large area. You're looking at about 34 million acres, about 53,000 square miles. So it's a very, very large footprint.
Drilling and extraction are well underway in different parts of Pennsylvania, northeast, central, and southwest Pennsylvania. Where are we in terms of getting at this?
We're at the early stage from what industry is telling us right now. There was some hiccups or roadblocks out there. A big part of that was the stumbling block over the water permits. And now that has been resolved for a large degree with SRBC, or the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, just recently issuing some permits, and DEP now working on some permits, it would appear that a big part of that is likely resolved. And you're probably going to see somewhat of a large push now to get more of those drill rigs in the ground from what companies are telling us.
Give us an idea of what the situation is in Salem Township, the township that you're representing right now in the state Supreme Court.
Well, Patty, Salem Township has been involved in litigation concerning a municipality's ability to regulate surface development associated with oil and gas well operations since 2005. Back in 2005, Salem adopted an ordinance that essentially regulated where access roads coming from public roads going to well sites could be. We attempted to regulate the location of gas collection lines running from the well site off the property. That ordinance was declared invalid by one of our local courts and was also declared invalid by the Commonwealth Court. Our case was recently heard by the Supreme Court. We just finished our arguments last week on the 9th, and we're waiting for a decision. But right now, Salem Township, I believe, has had 212, if my recollection is correct, gas well permits issued, but not put into effect. Drilling operations have been sort of on hold, and we think it's pending. The drillers are waiting for the results of these cases to come out, but we are not certain that they are going to hold off for long. Salem has just been discussing the drilling of 70 methane wells, coal bed methane wells, along its northeastern border, and the company who is doing that anticipates that there will be those 70 wells will be drilled within about 18 months, and that's obviously raising concerns with the township with respect to roadways and the damage that may be done to roads in this rather rural area.
We're going to find out more about the case and about Salem Township in a moment. You're a little bit ahead of the learning curve because in Texas, everywhere from Dallas to Fort Worth, they've been engaged in this for some time. Tell us a little bit about how the Barnett Shale compares with what we've got here in Pennsylvania.
Well, the Barnett Shale is, first of all, much smaller. It's about 5,000 square miles in north central Texas. So in comparison, the Marcellus Shale is 10 times larger. But it has been developed, actually the first well was drilled in 1981, but drilling in earnest didn't get underway until about 2001. So it has been now 6-7 years with a lot of development and drilling activity, and the techniques to drill these wells have been perfected there, and now that technology is being exported to the Marcellus Shale and to many other shales in the United States.
And hopefully the result is that we can avoid some of the problems that you may have encountered in your experience.
I think so, because like I say, the technologies have been developed and tweaked and refined there, and while there will be some differences in the drilling here, and that will come through experience in drilling the wells to see what technology has to be changed, but I think some of the startup problems will have been relieved by the development that we've had in the Barnett Shale.
Okay, and we'll be back to Barnett in a moment. But you're a wildlife specialist, and I wonder if you could begin by telling us what your concerns are with regard to the drilling and exploration of natural gas in Pennsylvania.
I think the biggest concerns would be that this has the potential for having a large, obviously, physical impact on our environment. And if we look at Pennsylvania as it is now, 60% forested, and particularly across the northern tier, we've got very extensive blocks of forest, and those are really important habitats for a number of species that require that. So things like our songbirds that are what are called neotropical migrants, they're ones that are here during the breeding season and then go to South America. They're found up there in very large numbers. Some of them are even at the level that they're called responsibility species for Pennsylvania. So something like a scarlet tanager, 17% of the world population is in our forests. And so those are species that require these large blocks of forest. There are other ones that are things like an Allegheny wood rat that most people don't know, but have been extirpated from a number of states. They're up there, but they're very negatively affected by forest fragmentation. So there are concerns over what effect fragmentation will have, because as these wells go in, you get the well site itself, which may be 1 to 5 acres, but then you also get associated pipelines and infrastructure and roads. So there's concern over what effect that will have, and then there's wanting to get everybody's sort of aware of this enough so that when you're planning a lease, they can be done in a way that can minimize negative impacts, because certainly there are better and worse ways to do things, and there are ways that we can look at that.
Okay, let's start with the positive, and the positive is economically this could be a boon. Pennsylvania could participate in this bonanza that is this oil and gas exploration. In the Barnett Shale situation, 55,000 jobs have been created to date. Tell us a little bit about those jobs and where you see that going from here.
Well, it has been a tremendous economic benefit to the region. In just the 7 years that a lot of drilling has been occurring. In fact, the number was recently revised to almost 90,000 jobs now have been created since that drilling activity started. And remember, we're just talking about a 20-county area, 5,000 square miles, so it's relatively small compared to the Marcellus Shale. But 90,000 jobs and $8 billion of additional economic activity generated by this drilling and related activity. So it's been a tremendous economic boon for the region.
Jobs that will last for 20 years, and tell us a little bit about the kinds of jobs they are.
Sure, these are permanent jobs. And in fact, if you look at the industrial sectors that have benefited from this drilling activity, first is retail sales, and second is the restaurant and hotel business, and third is construction, and the fourth is the oil and gas industry. So economists call this the spillover effect or the multiplier effect, because as, let's say, landowners receive money and royalty payments, they spend it. As people get new jobs or higher paying jobs, they spend it. they buy furniture, they buy new houses, cars, and so all sectors of the economy then are benefiting from this economic activity. So it's been a tremendous boon, and in fact, been articles written saying that the area of North Texas is somewhat recession-proof because of it.
There are also some articles saying that the Texas government is playing catch-up and reacting rather than being ahead of the curve on a number of things that also result from this, which is heavier loads of traffic on roadways and noise pollution, home devaluation, and I think scariest of all, things like gas leaks. So how do you respond to that?
Well, any economic benefit comes with costs. And I'm an economist, so I talk about costs and benefits. But there are temporary inconveniences. There are costs associated with it. For example, drilling a well is just like any construction site. There will be additional truck activity. And yes, in concentrated areas, that has caused damage to the roadways. And I think in a lot of cases, the counties weren't ready for that. And so they're playing catch up in how to maintain the roads. Many of these roads were designed for cars or light trucks, and we have heavy trucks going over those roads, and it does cause some damage. So those are some of the lessons learned, I think, in North Texas, that road maintenance is something that has to be looked at and be
getting
ready
the
for
oil
it.
and gas industry to help pay for the road repairs and those sorts of things as
Right,
well.
and a lot of the counties and cities now have adopted a process by which during the application of the permitting process, a bond has to be posted by the company to say if we damage the roads, then that bond will go toward repairing those roads.
People in northwestern Pennsylvania have been seeing a series of ads about the numbers of jobs that may be coming to Pennsylvania. What can you tell us about jobs that will end up being created here in Pennsylvania?
One of the things that we're hearing from companies is they're trying to hire local people. And it would appear at this point in time from some of the company reps and some of the industry that I've spoken to, including today at an industry meeting, that they are definitely looking to hire people. There's a shortage of rigs out there. There's a shortage of people to run those rigs. So as they ramp up in one, they're trying to ramp up in another. There's been a number of job expos that I've seen that industry has been trying to put on to find people, to find the people that have some of the skill sets that they're looking for. And we're also working with some of the institutional providers out there that could help train some of those same workers. Some of those might be folks even trained at the high school level, VOTEC type programs. Other ones will go through a more advanced type training. But there is definitely a move to bring more people along, and I think that'll be a positive for here in Pennsylvania.
Okay, we want to go to our audience. We have an audience member with a question.
My concern is environmental. I have seen numbers about the volume of water that it takes to complete the hydrofracking of a single well, and they're talking 1 to 3 million gallons of water. That water has to be hauled to the site. It has additives put in it. It picks up additives when it's underground. Who cleans it up, and how do they clean it up before they reuse it or discharge it?
There are 5 facilities in Pennsylvania right now licensed to treat wastewater. Tell us something about those sites and how many it will really take to handle the volume he's talking about.
One of the concerns that industry itself has, as do a lot of folks, including regulators that are watching and are responsible for indeed implementing the regulations on this, is how to deal with the volume of water that will come from that process. The numbers actually can even span a little higher than that. Industry will tell you it could be upwards of 5 million gallons depending upon the site. So the question then is, well, what do you do with all the water once it comes back out? A variety of things can be done according to DEP regulations here in Pennsylvania. There are several facilities that can actually inject it, deep well injection back into the ground if the geological formation will accept that. And there isn't much opportunity for that that's been discovered so far here in Pennsylvania. Another option would be to truck it out of state, and there are some of those facilities that can handle that water out of state, but obviously that's very expensive and involves a lot of trucks and the associated traffic, which we've already talked about as being problematic. Lastly, and the number one option that seems to be available is the treatment of that water. Some of that can be treated as per DEP policy in Pennsylvania through municipal treatment plants, or it can be treated at a specialized type of a treatment plant that are being constructed, have been constructed in the past, and are being permitted to have new construction to treat that water as a frac water and a product of those wells that over the course of time will be replenished as it comes back out of the wells and as more wells are drilled. So some of that water goes through a desalination process and can be reused or recycled. Others will be treated and released as long as it's been approved to do so back into the watershed, back into the water supply, but not back into the groundwater.
Some call it salt water, but in Texas, the experience has been that sometimes this water actually catches fire.
Well, I don't know about that, but it is fresh water mixed with sand that is the primary ingredient of the fracturing fluid. But when it comes back out of the shale, after being in contact with the shale, it is very salty, 10 times saltier than the ocean. So that's
it's
why
not just salty, there are heavy metals and radioactivity.
Well, whatever leaches out of, whatever is in the ground and the water comes into contact with, has the potential to leach into the water and come back. So it would be whatever natural substance is there can be a component of that fractured water as it flows back.
In terms of wildlife, what are your concerns about this byproduct that will brine, is what we're talking about, brine pollution that can end up in pools or be re-injected, and you're talking about cleaning this wastewater to an extent that it can be reused in wells. But what are your concerns as an environmentalist?
Well, I think we don't know right now, and certainly if it's out and available and something gets it, it kills them right off. And there have been examples of that in places in the past, but what effect it would have, I mean, I don't think we know. I mean, certainly it would not be good for them, and the aquatic resources can be affected by just the water removal right away, which right now has been permitted at something like 40 million gallons a day. Now the idea is that those river basin commissions are going to be monitoring that and can keep up with those flows, and that we'll know that, but whether that enforcement level is there is going to be the concern.
Okay, I want to get back to Salem Township for a moment, because the outcome of this case, I think, could influence the future of gas exploration throughout Pennsylvania. Tell us a little bit about the major legislation controlling the current situation.
Well, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, through the Oil and Gas Act, back in 1994, adopted an amendment to the Oil and Gas Act that precluded municipalities from adopting ordinances that affected the same features of oil and gas well operations that were otherwise affected by the Act, except for ordinances that were adopted under the municipality's planning code. Ordinances that are traditionally adopted under the MPC are those that are associated with zoning ordinances or subdivision and land development ordinances that you would normally see involved in subdivisions, those types of things. Under the state of the law as it is now, the municipalities are not able to impose any type of regulation on these operations. We are, as the law sits right now, precluded from engaging in any type of activity that would regulate any type of surface development associated with these industries. So essentially, every municipal solicitor in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is watching the outcome of these cases. With respect to zoning ordinances, the issue that's pending before the Supreme Court has to do with the ability of a municipality to restrict oil and gas well operations to certain zoning districts, and whether or not a municipality can preclude gas well operations, for example, in residential zones. And then that begs the next question, is that if you can preclude these operations altogether in certain zoning districts, what types of conditions may you impose, or if you can't preclude it, what types of conditions may you impose on those operations to lessen the overall impact on surrounding properties? One of the big issues that we have in Salem Township has to do with the protection of these lands for future development. We have obviously concerns, as do other municipal solicitors, that the placement of wells on property, the placement of access roads that are used to access those wells, and the placement of gas collection and transportation lines may preclude future development after the wells are capped.
We're going to take a question in just a moment, but that 1984 Oil and Gas Act, essentially there are 2,400 local governments, and essentially it keeps them out of the decision-making process, the idea being that it will allow for optimal development of oil and gas resources in Pennsylvania. So I want to put that out there, but I want to find out what is the situation in Texas in terms of local government involvement.
Within city limits, or township limits, I guess might be a parallel, most of the cities have adopted ordinances, gas drilling ordinances, and some of those are very extensive, and they will specify the setback distance from an occupied structure, a house, church, school, to the drilling site. There will be 600 feet, 1,000 feet, whatever the city has adopted. There will be sound regulation. How much sound can be generated during the day and during the night, measured at the property line. A whole host of regulations about once the drilling is complete, how the site will be fenced, landscaped. So essentially the cities and towns have adopted their own ordinances that will control drilling within their limits, city limits. And I think the system has worked very well.
Okay, do you want to comment on that?
And actually, that is
what you want.
That's exactly what we want. And that is
why don't we have that?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think the Supreme Court will be answering that. Or if they do not answer that question, then you may see a legislative solution to this problem. So we'll be waiting.
Wait and see. All right, we have a question from our audience. Go ahead, please, sir.
With Pennsylvania's unique system of municipal road ownership as we have, the question is, will there be enough financial support resources and financial support and resources to post public roads in a timely manner to protect the level, or to protect the local taxpayer and our rural transportation infrastructure? That's number one. And I happen to represent an outreach effort for Pennsylvania's Dirt and Gravel Road Maintenance Program that's invested over $50 million in the past decade to improve Pennsylvania's unpaved public roads, to reduce both the maintenance and save money for these rural townships, as well as to protect the surface waters of Pennsylvania. And what do you see that might be done to ensure that this money or an effort was not wasted and that could build on the successes of this program?
We'll start with you, Mr. Falatovich.
Well, there are a couple of things that come into play. First, in Pennsylvania, municipalities have the ability to enact weight limits on their roadways. And most municipalities have adopted ordinances that allow them to enter into road maintenance or excess maintenance agreements with anybody who is hauling heavy equipment or equipment that's over the weight limits for the roads. The problem that you have, though, has to do with rural municipalities and the types of the roads that you normally find in rural municipalities. For example, you might find everything from a paved road, a major highway, to a shot and chip road, to a gravel road that may be used by many people over the course of a day for ingress and egress. And the problem that we are having is that there are no specifications for the construction of gravel roads or even the repair of shot and chip roads in these municipalities. Under the law in Pennsylvania, any excess haul or anybody who's hauling heavy equipment over these roads is required to return the roads to to the same condition or a better condition than they were in before the excess hauling began. The problem that you have, though, is that many of these rural roads are not in the greatest shape to begin with. So municipalities are struggling with the concept of what condition do you bring these roads back up to after damage has been caused by this equipment. So that's a big problem, and that's the most imminent problem that you're going to see faced by municipalities once these drilling operations get underway. With respect to the second part of your question, the road bonding agreements that are entered right now are limited in the amounts of money or the amounts that can be bonded per mile of road. And right now the limit is only $6,500 for these types, for gravel roads or paved roads, and it's or $6,500 a mile. So it's kind of a very low minimum when these municipalities are looking to do repair work. However, most of the individuals or the companies that are involved in these types of operations are pretty good about restoring roads. But one of the concepts that is being discussed right now is the creation of a separate fund that may be established, or a separate fund that may be established and funded by these well operators to create a fund of monies or pool of monies to go to municipalities who are more likely to be impacted by these operations to help them rebuild roads or recreate roads. And if that type of fund would be created, that would be a win-win type situation. But that's something that has to be created on the state level and cannot be created on the local level.
Did you have something to add to that?
The only thing that I would add beyond that, the question commonly comes up with township supervisors, county commissioners, local government entities about the tax structure that we have here in Pennsylvania and whether that tax structure would allow for taxes to be collected from the minerals that are being extracted from companies, landowners, whatever, and then that money actually staying within those communities and going to repair those same roads. That's not the arrangement here in Pennsylvania. It is in some other states. There is a lot of discussion going on about that right now at the legislative level, interaction between those local officials and state legislators. So where that'll go in the end is to be seen. Right now there's obviously opposition at a variety of levels, and there's a number of people promoting it at the same time, so we'll have to see what the outcome of that is. But that could be helpful if that was instituted. It's to be seen whether that's the case.
Okay, we'll follow up on that in just a moment. I think we have a question over here.
We all have a concern about the environmental impact, and I think you can, to some extent, boil it down to the regulatory environment in Pennsylvania. A lot of this stems from the 1984 Oil and Gas Act. Well, we're 24 years after that, and I don't think the oil and gas industry or the market today is what it was even, we can say, as short as 24 years ago. So I think the state, we as a state, need to encourage our legislators, our DEP, that maybe we need to start looking at things real hard, quickly. And I know quick and legislative change don't go hand in hand in Pennsylvania, but we need to really get a hand on it quickly and develop good regulations, not to over-regulate the industry. I'd like to think that we want to help them through it. We want to make it so that they can follow it. And then right along with that, I think our Department of Environmental Protection going to need the staff to help implement these changes. For an example, right now, in the entire state of Pennsylvania, there's 2 people that issue the gas well permits. All of the permits that you read about go through one or the other's hands. I mean, that's almost ludicrous, at this stage. This is coming at us like a freight train, and agree that we'll probably have to approve some more staff to be involved to help the industry keep our state clean.
He mentioned train, and I read an article published in Fort Worth Weekly. It says, this is a runaway train, and it is always harder to stop a runaway train than it is to prevent it in the first place. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about some lessons learned in Texas.
Well, I think the gentleman is correct. Certainly in Texas, we have a 100-year history of oil and gas regulation, but the Barnett Shale was different. And so those regulations have already been tweaked and changed and altered and improved just based on the Barnett Shale. So there are regulations that were added to our existing regulations that apply only to the Barnett Shale. And so there's no question that it's new and different and requires a new and fresh look from a regulatory standpoint.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Yes, my name is Terry Engelder. I'm on the faculty in geosciences here at Penn State. There's been a series of TV ads recently. Probably the most recent was during the 4th quarter of Monday Night Football, in which one of the largest of the Appalachian gas shale operators promised that the environment would be protected during production of oil and gas. Now, this environment includes the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, which is the solid earth, and the biosphere. I wonder if we might use this forum to create a public record in terms of what our expectation is of this company, which has promised to protect our environment.
We'll start with Margaret Brittingham.
Well, I think that would be great if we could hold them to that. I mean, and I think we should start with that. Certainly with the water has been the issue that people have had the biggest immediate concern, and particularly with their drinking water quality and groundwater. And I think if we look at what's going on in the world today, water is going to be the big issue. You know, when we come 20, 30, 40 years from now, that's what we're going to all be looking for. So I think the fresh water is the big one. So put it back to them. How can you say that this is going to be okay? And I think part of that is, as we were just talking about, we don't have the people to enforce even the regulations that we have. And so I think what we need to do is to add this in think of this as a real cost to business, and what do we need to do to ensure that? Because I do think that water is going to be the number one hot issue, what we're looking for in the future. In terms of the terrestrial areas in Pennsylvania itself, as I said before, we are a keystone state in terms of wildlife populations. I mean, if we look at the state itself, of course, wildlife recreation is a $6 billion industry. Wildlife itself, we have many species that, as I said, we are the responsible for these species. So, and certainly we don't want to lose all of them and to make major changes. So I think, but to do that, we have to look ahead. We've got to be able to say, okay, are we going to have thresholds? Because what the concern is that we're moving at such a rapid pace that suddenly you'll hit a threshold, and then changes will occur, and we won't even know it. And so I think, again, just putting in, can we sit down and decide what are those thresholds that we have, and can we monitor them, and then can we start getting somebody to support doing that?
You mentioned fragmentation earlier, and the Allegheny National Forest has more well permits in that forest than all of the national forests combined. Tell us a little bit about your concerns in terms of fragmentation. We know pipelines are going to be laid, and they're going to be how many miles? Hundreds and hundreds of miles of pipeline.
The Allegheny Forest is kind of a complicated one because 90% of the forest, the mineral rights, are owned by somebody else. So they don't even own the mineral rights. And so it's sort of talk about fragmentation of ownership right there. But in Pennsylvania, we have something like 8,000 miles of pipeline now, of major pipeline now, and that was in, 2007, so that's obviously going to be a lot more. We have more roads than any other state. How big
land has to be cleared for it to be a problem for wildlife?
Well, you know, it's not.
Can you quantify that?
You can't, not really. I mean, you can't really, but you can say some of the effects are you have species that require large areas, so they're impacted. You have an introduction of invasive and exotic species, so that's another issue. You have species that you inhibit their dispersal, so something like amphibians, which we are the heart of biodiversity for amphibians, have more, a higher diversity of amphibians than anywhere else in the country. They can't cross these areas, so you affect them that way. So there's a number of different ways, and then you have roads, and that brings people in, and of course that brings disturbance in right there, so that changes it. And so I think what we do need to do is to put together, groups of people thinking about this and say, okay, can we come up with thresholds? What do we want to make sure we have? And then can we also pick sensitive species that we're going to monitor and say, can we monitor them so we can know what changes are going on? And certainly there are things you can do. So when a new pipeline goes in, you can say, let's put that next to an existing road.
One thing that I would say too, Patty, and I think it ties into maybe both of the points here, and that's about the number of well sites that are out there. You think about the example you're using with the Allegheny National Forest and the multitude of well sites that are there, the pads that are actually there. Most of those have an individual well in them. It's an individual site with an individual well. And one of the things that I would be an advocate of, and some of the companies are talking about now, and some of the experience we've had a chance in some of the trips that we've been to Texas and seen what's down there, is having one well site, maybe having it just a little bit bigger, and having multiple wells on that site. So you have
that results in fewer roads.
It's fewer roads. It's smaller impact out there because it's just one spot. And beyond that, you also have less visual impact. When you think about the fact that we're here in the Pennsylvania Wilds area, and we're thinking about the tourism that we were talking about, having a lot of visual impacts out there and having somewhat of a, maybe a more of an industrial type feel is not something that people are coming to spend time in that area as a tourist. And that's our #2 industry here in Pennsylvania. So I think we need to be cognizant of that as well, and we need to do what we can to encourage companies to put more wells on one site and have less of those actual impacts on the landscape out there.
We are certainly seeing that companies are now drilling multiple wells, as many as 10, 15, or 20 wells on one drill site, one pad site, because the technology is there to do it. These modern drilling rigs, basically they drill a well and they can just skid it over on tracks and drill another one. And so that's already happening, and I'm sure can and will happen here. In terms of the pipelines, in some cases it's very difficult for one company to share a pipeline with another just because of the logistics of it, but it's certainly possible for them to share a right-of-way, even if they have to put their own pipeline in somebody else's right-of-way. At least there's just one right-of-way. So, and we're seeing that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You have a question for us, please?
This is back to the topic of water. We're all aware of the acid rock on the skytop. How would the well drilling, what would they do if they do hit some acid rock and you're extracting the water? What do they do? How do they handle that?
Well, the water that comes up is acidic. There are heavy metals in it. There is a lot of salt. You said 10 times what ocean water would be. It's also radioactive. Can you address her concern?
Well, very, very trace amounts of, if there is any naturally occurring radioactive material. But, well, in Texas, most of this water, the flowback water that's used in fracturing, is injected into deep saltwater injection wells. Now, we just happen to have a saltwater formation that is down about 10,000 feet, and it has a limestone cap on it. So it is a natural depository for this salt water. I mean, it already contains salt water, so additional salt water is just pumped into it. So the situation here may be different, but that we're able to do that. That is primarily how the fracturing water is disposed of. Now, there are some pilot projects of reusing the water, distillation projects, and they're certainly having some success with that, although current technology, they're not able to recycle 100% of the water.
Let's get back to the 5 plants in Pennsylvania. I read about Mark Wilson of GE Water and Process Technologies and the need for more brine plants. He says Marcellus water is the worst water on the planet. It's awful.
Well, everybody has an opinion as to what that might be. I think your initial comment was about the number of plants, and I think maybe that speaks to whether there's enough volume out there to deal with the volume of water that will come out of
Once we're at full throttle,
right,
certainly 5 plants aren't enough to accommodate
that's correct.
The amount of water that's going to be
so volume is really going to be the
treated.
issue, and it was something that we were having a discussion about a little earlier this evening, and what will happen with all that water once all that's extracted, and the numbers are already talked about here from some of the reservoirs that we had to take that water. Where is it actually going to go? There will have to be an associated ramping up with the technology out there, with the plants that will either recycle that water and reuse it, or have some means of dealing with some of the product that's coming up with that water. So that's certainly something that's occurring now. That's something that we're seeing. DEP is working on the regulations, and something I think we'll see quite a bit more of. I would also add in there that one of the things that is being discussed right now by industry, and I think you'll find that there'll be a fair amount of acceptance to it, is the idea about using it. It also speaks to the question about the acid water, but the idea about using acid mine drainage water, going to the source of some of those streams where that acid mine water is coming from, when it's coming out of the mines, and using that water as a water source, and then going through a treatment process thereafter, and that could be released back in a better state than was actually found. So I think there's going to be some solutions that are found to actually get some of the water and then go through some of the treatment thereafter.
Are you using wastewater in Texas?
There are some projects where they are doing that. They have partnered with cities or municipalities, tap into their treatment facilities and are using that water. So yes, it definitely is happening.
Good. We have a question from the audience?
I think it's more a correction. The statement that you made that this is the worst water ever is incorrect. I mean, the Marcellus has some salt in it, but it's not anywhere near that description, and it's not even 10 times seawater. It's only about 4 times seawater. You also said that it's acidic. The studies that we did on the acid rock that was discussed earlier suggested that in the northeast, the Marcellus is quite alkaline. Even though it does have significant pyrite concentrations, it is an alkaline environment.
Let's talk a little bit about what happens 10 years from now, and I think we'll talk about the pipeline in a moment, but I think one of the concerns that a lot of people have is that the larger companies own the wells now, and as they become less productive, mid-sized companies will buy them, and then after that, smaller companies, which may or may not have the same standards as the large companies. I'm wondering what your experience in Texas is.
Well, we're early in the process as well, so we haven't.
So you're not in the selling stage yet?
No, we're definitely not there. These, it will be 10, 15 years or longer before we are drilled out. So we have a lot of years ahead of us to drill. But Texas and Oklahoma and I think Louisiana and probably some other states do have, as part of the permitting process, they require a contribution to the state fund that will eventually be used in case there are abandoned wells, that there will be monies drawn from that state fund to take care of that. So that's how other states have dealt with it, and that's certainly a possibility here. If that doesn't already exist, it may exist.
So how concerned are you in Salem Township, for example, about the eventuality of abandoned wells?
Well, we're concerned with the remnants of these wells and what occurs on these properties that would preclude further development. I think we would have some difficulties if you have capped wellheads that were right in the middle of 100-acre farms. That would impede a property owner's or a surface owner's ability to develop that property or to deal with the problems of urban sprawl that we're dealing with in Salem Township as well. We run into difficulties with, or could run into difficulties with abandoned transmission lines that could create problems. One of the other things that is a practical problem, even when these wells are operating with future development, is that under our Pennsylvania one-call system, many of these transmission lines or transportation lines that are constructed by private well operators are not required to be reported. So if you get into digging operations or whatever the case may be on private property, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and these wellheads or these well or transportation lines are not marked, you could run the risk of getting into some catastrophic events, which would then bring about volunteer firemen, expose them to danger. That's
where
correct.
The pipeline is going.
That's exactly right, because when you make anybody out here who's a municipal official knows that you make a one call or Pennsylvania one call, and all of your lines are supposed to be marked. Well, these lines that are constructed by private operators are not always marked, so it creates some difficulties along those lines, and that's obviously a concern to municipalities who are providing emergency services.
And as far as I know, most companies, natural gas is odorless, and most companies aren't odorizing them.
Gas is not odorized until it enters the distribution system on its way to a residence.
So as it's going through our rural areas, if it were to leak, people wouldn't necessarily know.
No, it is an odorless gas. Now, if leaks can be detected in a lot of other ways, dead vegetation and so on. But leaks are very rare in these pipelines, but the odorization was designed for houses, and it really wouldn't do any good in an open environment. If there was a leak, in most cases you wouldn't even be able to smell it, even if it was
No,
override.
correct me if I'm wrong. I was reading about Texas, and one physicist and former retired engineer said that an accident, you can expect one every 6 months, an explosion on some level because of gas going through pipelines, the fact that the gas is wet, and so that the pipes are corroding from the inside out, and there's some push to dehydrate the gas.
Well, you know, I saw that number too. I have no earthly idea where he dreamed that up. But because there are, I mean, I'm not going to say pipelines never have a problem. Natural gas does burn. That is its characteristic. That's why it has value. But there have been very few pipeline accidents. In fact, pipeline transportation is the safest form of transportation of anything in the United States. If you look at product mile, how much product actually goes through. But it's natural gas has been flowing through pipelines for, I don't know, 75 years, and it's just a very safe form of transportation. And there are all kinds of new technologies that prevent corrosion, and internal computer-controlled devices that detect exactly the state of the pipeline and if any repair is necessary. So technology has really gone a long way, and as a result, pipelines are extremely safe.
Okay. Question from the audience?
Can you talk about the amount of energy that you expect to mine from this, and specifically relative to the popular topic lately of how much energy you'd get from offshore drilling?
In Texas, from the Barnett Shale region, which I say is about 5,000 square miles, right now, just that fairly small area is producing about 6% of the natural gas that's consumed in the United States. So, I mean, that's a large number for a fairly small area. And then you look at the Marcellus Shale, which is potentially 10 times that size. It's huge. I mean, it has a huge potential to change the natural gas situation in the United States. Natural gas reserves and oil and gas reserves had been on the decline for years, for decades. And oil reserves are still on the decline. But starting in 2006, natural gas reserves in the United States actually leveled off and have started to increase. And it is because of the shale plays primarily.
Anything to add to that?
Well, I would just say here in Pennsylvania, the numbers that are talked about are 50 trillion cubic feet of gas that could be expected to be extracted from the Marcellus here. That actually represents about 10%, is what our university geologist, Dr. Engelder, was talking about earlier. So we're talking about a very large amount, but it's still a total amount of gas that could be held there, but a very small amount that is actually extracted. There certainly would be hope that in the future technology, as we all know, improves over time, and those numbers would increase. But at the moment, that's what's expected, is that 10% figure.
You know, we've known that both of these shale formations have existed for quite some time, and it's only recently that we're tapping into them. You talked a little bit earlier about technology, and I'm wondering if you can give us some concrete examples of how you've seen technology advance in the few years that you've been at this in Texas.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, the first well in the Barnett Shale was drilled in 1981. It was by Mitchell Energy Company, George Mitchell, and who is now becoming known as the grandfather of not only the Barnett Shale, but perhaps all shale plays, because he took it on as a personal goal to figure out how to get natural gas out of a rock. Basically, his engineers and geologists told him it can't be done. And he wouldn't take no for an answer. And over the years, he utilized other fracturing techniques and tweaked them and changed them to apply to the Barnett Shale and now all other shales. But it was really the combination of horizontal drilling and water fracturing that have made these shale plays work. So, and those technologies continue to be improved. The length of the horizontal wellbore continues to get longer as technology improves.
And how deep are you going right now? 6,000, 7,000 feet?
They're going about 5,000 feet now on the lateral, and expect to go further. It's just a matter of time and improving the technology.
Okay, and you actually have property that's within the Marcellus Shale formation. Can you tell us a little bit about what activity is going on in your neck of the woods, in your own backyard?
Sure. Right now, we're seeing quite a bit of activity right around us with the permits that have just been issued for the water. I believe that you're going to see an uptick in that activity. That's what companies are indicating. So there are quite a few wells that have been actively drilled near us within the communities right adjacent to us. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that here real quickly. And
what evidence is there in terms of noise or pollution or traffic that you're seeing in your backyard?
Traffic is something, and a number of people have spoken to the idea about the truck traffic, and that is something that we're looking at, and township supervisors are looking at in our area. I'm also a township official, and it's something that is a big concern that we have, and what that impact will be on our roads, and how we're going to be able to deal with some of those issues as they occur in a much larger fashion in the very near future, which is what our expectations are. So it's a big concern, and it's something we're watching and something we're working with other officials or county folks and people beyond that. So it's something that, and not only us, but a lot of folks around us as well, and certainly more broadly than that around the state of Pennsylvania.
You know, bloggers are out there saying, what are my county officials going to do for me? And of course, this is your concern as well. Ultimately, what power do you hope local governments have with regard to this?
Well, one thing that we hope is that enough resources are allocated to the DEP to take care of the environmental concerns, because that's going to be the first concern of municipalities. But essentially what we want to be able to do is to at least have enough regulation over the surface development associated with these types of operations that we lessen the impact of the operations on surrounding property owners and preserve lands for future development. And we think that if everybody develops a common sense approach, that certainly can occur.
Can you tell us what the mood is in everywhere from Dallas to Fort Worth, and in terms of what's happening there? I mean, it's been a boon to the economy. What's the mood where you live?
Well, I would say in general, as far as oil and gas drilling or gas drilling, the mood is very positive. And we're seeing neighborhood associations getting together with other neighborhood associations, and in doing that, putting together thousands of acres that get offered as a package to a gas company or multiple gas companies who then come in and compete for that large acreage. And so we're really seeing an increase in the rate of signing, because these neighborhoods are now getting together, and thousands of homeowners signing at one time. So I would say it's, as you mentioned the train, I'd say the train is out of the station and increasing in speed.
Are landmen still knocking on a lot of doors throughout Pennsylvania, and are you still talking with a lot of people wondering about how they should sign and whether they should be part of a group?
Yeah, Patty, we get hundreds of calls literally over the course of a week period, and there's still a lot of landmen that are operating here in Pennsylvania. We have seen that there's been a shift, though. There are some areas that they seem to have pulled back from, and some other areas that they've moved to. So accordingly, the rates that are being offered in some of these other areas, mainly the southwestern corner of the state, have increased pretty dramatically over the course of just a little bit of time. Down there, 2 months ago, you were probably looking at rates that were being paid somewhere in the $150 to $200 range that are now up into the $3,000, $3,500 range. So obviously that's created a lot of euphoria down there, and a lot of people
maybe
that are...
some hardship between,
sure.
hard feelings
Yeah,
between neighbors
yeah.
who've got 25 versus...
That's right, yeah. There's no question about that. But it's one of those things that once a contract is signed, just like any other contract you would sign, that's the situation, and that's what you signed on for. But regardless, there is a lot of interest, which was your question, and we're still seeing a lot of doors that are being knocked on. And our primary message as educators is to talk to people and make them realize this is a contract. They need to understand the terms and the conditions that are in that contract before they sign it in every detail. So hiring an attorney that is versed in those terms is very important.
Okay, I want to get a final message from each of you. You've been there, and I'm wondering what advice you can give to us here in Pennsylvania to minimize the social and environmental impact.
Well, it sounds to me like you're on the right track, and that is to revisit your existing regulations at the state level, and to look at more local ordinances and giving tighter control to the residents of an area. I think that has been a success in North Texas, where the cities provide their own ordinances, and they're all a little different. Even in neighboring cities, each one will have input from the residents, and I think overall that has proved to be very successful. The gas company knows the rules. If I'm going to go into this municipality, I know the rules, and so I think getting ahead of the curve as you are is certainly the right thing to do.
And your advice or final thoughts to local governments?
Well, I think the biggest impact, aside from the physical impact on roads and those types of things that municipalities are going to face, does have or is the socioeconomic impact that they're going to see. Tom made mention of this a couple of weeks ago in another program that we were doing. There is a creation of sort of a have and have-nots in these circumstances, and it doesn't mean necessarily that I'm getting $2,000 an acre, my neighbor's getting $2,500. It means that some people don't have gas rights to sell, but there are still mining activities that are taking place on their property. So their concerns go to the condition of their roads, to the noise that's generated from the well operations. And these are the people who are coming to municipalities and who are going to be coming to municipalities in the future to get some assistance. So we have to be cognizant of the socioeconomic impact that's created by these operations, and then hopefully work with the gas well operators to try to resolve those problems.
Interesting, because in Alaska they kind of share the wealth.
Because
they all feel the pain of the oil industry, and gas industry. Right?
Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, the law changed a couple of years ago, and municipalities cannot tax gas rights in the same way that they can tax or impose property taxes on coal rights. So that has changed. So this is out of the municipalities' hands. We don't have the ability to do revenue sharing. I wish we did. That would certainly lessen our problems.
All right, and final thoughts from you, Margaret?
Well, I think in terms of private landowners, we would like them to work with natural resource professionals in addition to having an attorney, and think about, again, where they're planning, where those wells would go, where the roads would go, where the pipelines would go, and similarly to think about restoration, that restoration is a really important part of the whole process and in a way that they can make a big difference. So I think they need to think about that. On the sort of private-public side of it, you get a private benefit, but you can have a public damage to this whole wildlife resource, which belongs to the public. And so I think we need to think about that as a state, and again, try to put in some mechanism where we're getting funding to monitor these populations, make sure that we're not making major changes, because again, it's been an extremely important part of our heritage and a part of the economy here.
And that's all the time we have for now, but we will be periodically reporting on gas well drilling in the Marcellus Shale and what it means for Pennsylvanians. Until then, thank you to tonight's guest, Margaret Brittingham. She is a professor of wildlife resources and an extension wildlife specialist at Penn State. Ed Ireland, who came to us from Texas. He's executive director of the Barnett Shale Energy Education Council in Texas. Extension educator Tom Murphy, a member of the statewide Penn State Cooperative Extension Natural Gas Team, and attorney Gary Filodovich, who represents Salem Township over how much control local municipalities have over drilling for natural gas. For all of us here at Penn State Public Broadcasting, I'm Patty Satalia. Thanks for joining us. Have a good night.
This has been a production of WPSU. Visit the Penn State section of Get Local to find programs that make the resources of Penn State University available in your home on your schedule. Categories include Penn State Life, Research, Outdoors, Home and Garden, Arts, PA Stories, Health, Education, and World War II. Penn State on-demand videos are posted with additional online resources at live.psu.edu/. www.wpsu.org/VOD.